High-end PC gaming components are excellent. For example, if you're the proud owner of an RTX 4090, or maybe you're more of a console gamer and have picked yourself up a shiny new PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X. But if you're using that new fancy hardware on an old gaming monitor or TV and dealing with poor viewing angles, washed out colors, and just frankly lackluster HDR support, then you're not exactly doing yourself a favor. To that end, MSI have sent over a MAG 27.4 UPF gaming monitor. It's a 27-inch screen which is positioned to be, I think, a compelling option for both PC gamers, yes, but also those of us who have plunged into the now current generation consoles. So let's begin with a quick overview of the 27.4 UPF. As you probably gathered, the monitor itself measures 27 inches in terms of screen real estate and is outfitted with a 4K panel which can display up to 144Hz either via DisplayPort or HDMI. We also have Vega mounting options, but I decided to go with the included stand for my setup. There are, of course, cable routing options, and it allows you to adjust swiveling side to side, that's up to a 90-degree rotation, and also tilting too, and of course height adjustments. The stand is sturdy enough and has a flat base with enough heft, so it won't really budge around and shift around on your desk or table if you're gaming, and I think for most users you should be able to get a pretty comfortable angle as well. Continuing with the basics of the unit, there are two HDMI 2.1 ports, again capable of up to 144Hz. Of course, this will be device dependent, so for example, a PS5 will only run up to 120Hz at 4K, and same as an Xbox Series X, and a Switch of course is like 60Hz if memory serves. And there's also a DisplayPort 1.4a as well, which also allows up to 144Hz too. We also have a single USB-C connector, so that can also be a display connector, assuming of course your setup is requiring one, and it can also charge devices up to 65 watts, for example a phone. We also have a couple of USB Type A connectors and a single USB-B as well. I know it sounds a bit clumsy to say. For those of us who need it, there's also a headphone jack, which of course you can plug into the screen. Again, depending on your setup, that might be helpful. Now let's talk about power connectors. So there are typically two options that monitor manufacturers will go with, either a power brick or a kettle plug. MSI have chosen to go, of course, with the power brick, which, as you guys know, means that you have a thicker cable which plugs into the brick, and then a longer, thinner cable which will then hook to the screen itself. Now, personally speaking, I do prefer kettle plugs, but that also has its own drawbacks as well. For example, monitor weight can start going up, and of course you also have perhaps some additional thickness to the screen. So really it is a trade-off between the two, and well, yeah, it's not really one is better than the other. Generally speaking though, the ports and connectors are very typical of what you can expect from a monitor, and it does give you everything you need for a bedroom or office gaming setup. So if you have a PlayStation 5, a Switch, Xbox Series X, high-end gaming PC, then you're definitely good to go here. But let's move on to the actual screen specifications, because really that's the reason you're going to buy a monitor, right? Generally speaking, the colors and contrasts are very good here. The 27.4 UPF carries a VESA Display HDR 400 certification. Now of course, you can get much more expensive HDR 1000 displays, for example, but this is still very good for gaming for most folks. The display brightness is 400 CD/M2 with a contrast ratio of 1001. Now, this definitely does look nice. As for colors, well, the MAG 27.4 UPF leverages 8-bit color with FRC, which means frame rate control. Now, if you're not too familiar with what FRC is, basically it's to enhance color precision. Now this is not as good as, let's say, 10-bit color, but it is still considerably better than standard 8-bit. What MSI basically are employing here is some technical jiggery pokery, and it uses some type of temporal dithering. This basically improves color transitions by essentially just smoothing things out. As for the monitor's aesthetics, there's not a huge amount here to say. The design of the 27.4 UPF is pretty simple. There's a lack of garish logos or large bezels, but there are some nice touches, such as the rear of the monitor has an emblazoned dragon logo, which of course is MSI's trademark here, and it's right into the molded plastic. It looks quite nice, but yes, it is quite subtle. Now, personally speaking, I prefer this in screens, just, across the board, whether it's a TV or a monitor, because I really want my eyes to focus on the display itself, because, well, that's just kind of important. But there's also a second purpose to this from MSI's perspective, as well as benefiting you, and that is that it keeps the BOM bill of materials as reasonable as possible, so they can basically bump the specifications up as much as possible, while obviously keeping the price as affordable as possible. Again, that's not a bad thing. It's a smart decision from MSI, and again, from my personal preference, I do prefer simple aesthetics and dark colours when it comes to a monitor. So, let's talk about the testing, shall we? I decided initially to test this on a PlayStation 5, because I was just quite curious how it would work on a console, because I suspect many folks now are going to want to run this for dual purpose, for example, a PC and a PS5. Now, I won't bore you with the technical details of how you get this up and running on a PS5, because if you own a PS5 and you've done any, plugging into any TV, you'll know how it really works. You plonk in a HDMI cable, you follow the PS5's OS configuration for HDR images, and then you're just good to go. Obviously, VRR and HDR support, as well as 120Hz, which of course is the maximum the PS5 can support, work just perfectly here. I decided to try a couple of different games, including Spider-Man 2 and the cutesy built-in game Astro's Playroom. Both titles obviously also have vastly different art styles, and quite frankly, they show off the screen in very different but unique ways. I tested Spider-Man 2 in both a darkened room with the lights off, and this was just as sun was setting in rainy old England during, well, just coming into the winter. And again, I tested with the overhead lights on in the same room. Obviously, YouTube colours and camera things are definitely a bit of a problem, but it really is pretty impressive actually gaming on this thing in real life. It also feels excellent as well with the response time. Now, the response time from my personal play actually feels pretty excellent. It's 1 ms/GTG, and to my mind, it did well without significant ghosting, and also the anti-glare on the screen helped a lot. And shifting to extreme viewing angles, which of course you can see on screen, either to the side of the monitors and above and below, there's no noticeable hitching, there's no, for example, obvious bleeding, glare effects, that type of thing. Basically speaking, the screen did exactly what the doctor ordered. What about PC? Well, I decided to plug the MAG27 4UPF into our RTX 4090. This time I opted to use the DisplayPort just because I figured it's good to just make certain everything's up to snuff. And again, it's pretty much as you would expect for any setup. I'm using Windows 11, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective. Once you're in the desktop, you go to NVIDIA Drivers control panel, you choose the correct refresh rate because Windows is typically choosing the safe option, which is 60Hz, which of course is not what we want, and then you can enable something like G-Sync. It would also be pretty much the same thing, of course, with AMD, albeit with their drivers instead. For games, I don't really have much more to say than what I did with the PS5. Games like Resident Evil 4 Remake, Alan Wake 2, and other titles just look fantastic. Of course, this is going to be performance dependent. Basically speaking, you're going to really want to churn out the frame rates and enable something like ray tracing on. A small snag with PC gaming, and it's not really to do with this monitor, it's just kind of how it is, and that is that HDR support isn't quite as simple and smooth. Now, sometimes SDR is just the better way to go, especially with older games. Of course, your mileage will definitely vary, and of course, there's a lot of caveats here, but that's just kind of how it is with Windows. It is getting a lot better, though, I will say, particularly versus, let's say, 2-3 years ago. Now, I personally feel that 144Hz is enough for pretty much any single-player title, but if you are hardcore into first-person shooters and very competitive, so you play in tournaments or whatever, a higher refresh rate panel from MSI, for example 240Hz or something like that, may be a better decision. Now, I am not a hardcore player anymore. I don't really, I'm not like a hardcore first-person shooter fiend. I play mostly single-player content and, a couple of things here or there. But generally, 144Hz is more than enough for pretty much everything for me and the games I play. Now, I will also add, of course, that even when you're running a lot of modern games with DLSS, with ray tracing enabled and all that stuff, even an RTX 4090 would really struggle to get over 144Hz on many games anyway, so that's just something to bear in mind. But I will also mention the monitor's OSD. Now, this is pretty much fully everything you would expect. You can change different modes for the monitor, and our testing, I decided to leave everything to default. The main reason is because I think that's what most people would do when running the screen. There are certainly extensive options, and of course you could also use NVIDIA or AMD's control panels to adjust colors, and you can get a really good experience. Outside of that, MSI's KVM support is also a thing as well, so if you do have multiple systems, then of course you can certainly make use of that. So there you have it then. The 274 UPF is an interesting screen, and it's retailing, at least in the UK right now, for around 450 Great British pounds, or your regional equivalent. Now, as I've said, I think that this is an excellent screen for the price, but obviously no monitor is going to fit every usage scenario. Again, if you are looking for a larger screen, MSI, for example, as well as, other competitors do have a list of screens which go up to much larger sizes, so we'll, of course, leave a couple of those options on screen right now that you can take a look at. And again, if you are also a highly competitive FPS player, then perhaps a higher refresh rate screen is going to be an option for you. But I think for a lot of folks, including myself, to be honest, well, I don't play competitive FPS, so 144Hz is more than enough. And again, I think this screen is an excellent option for those of us who perhaps play, yes, PC games, but also sometimes play Xbox, PlayStation 5, that type of thing as well. I don't hesitate to give this a recommendation. It's been an excellent screen thus far, and I'm probably going to be continuing to use this as a daily driver, as a secondary screen, and also for like benchmarking purposes, that type of stuff. So it's certainly going to be, let's just say, continuing to get some use from me. With that said, guys, hopefully you have found this video helpful. If you did, of course, we will leave some links below for the MAG 274 UPF monitor. And yeah, with that said, have an amazing day. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.